Hello. Hi. Oh, wow, so friendly. Okay, I guess I should start, even though I don't want it to. Hello. Thank you for agreeing to be trapped in a room with me to talk about fashion. I'm always excited when people are willing to do that. And this is totally unrelated to anything about fashion, but I just went to like Melbourne Central and you have a Kit Kat store. It was the best thing. I almost did not come to this talk because I wanted to. Okay, I'm stalling, so let's just get started. So, hi, I'm Victoria. I'm the communications director at Kit Fox Games, which is a little indie studio in Montreal, Canada. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Previously, I've worked on games like Omen Sight, Leap of Fate, and a really big mobile game with over 1 million active users. And you can find me on Twitter at the Tran. If by the end of this you have questions and I can't get to it or you're too shy to come up to ask, feel free to tweet me with the hashtag #FashionInGames. I will look through it, I will answer it, no worries. So there we go. This is Kit Fox. So we, again, like I said, we're in Montreal, and we are a team of 9. You've probably heard of us if you've heard of Boyfriend Dungeon, which is a dating simulator dungeon crawler mashup. And we are also publishing Dwarf Fortress and 6 Ages. We've worked on things like Moon Hunters. And we've also been working on publishing Mondo Museum and Lucifer Within Us, which is like a mystery detective game. But anyways, that's a lot, and we're here to talk about fashion. So briefly, why did I think fashion was a worthy topic to talk about? So when I was younger, I played a lot of dress-up games, and I hid it. I never talked about the fact that I did because I didn't think it was a real game that I should be playing. I thought I should be playing Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. Real story, I actually told someone I played Call of Duty because I thought it would make me cool, and it was, gosh, so many mistakes as a teenager, so many. But anyways, yeah, but I actually did play a lot of games like Roar World, My Scene, and the Barbie games online, Doll Makers, if any of you have played that. Yes, thank you. I love it when people also have played these things. But yeah, I love dressing up, and I hid it because it seemed like such a weird, girly thing to do, and it wasn't cool in my mind. But in reality, it was a way for me to frame my perception of myself to the world and kind of figure out what I felt more comfortable with. And I feel somewhere along the way we lost this, because as I talked about this more and more game developers came up to me and agreed that before they used to play a lot of these games, but now like they never talked about it because it didn't seem like a real game. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Because right now, come on, there we go. Games typically explore domination and force as gameplay. And I think fashion brings expression and aesthetics into it. So just a little bit about this is that I want to clear up some definitions in case we're not super clear about the definitions about fashion. So first is that, oh my gosh, sorry, my notes are tiny and I'm trying to see them. But yeah, so fashion is more than just something that I think looks good, right? It's nebulous and extremely subjective. What I consider good fashion is as subjective as who I think is attractive. But the point here of the talk isn't to talk about what's good or bad. It's for you to understand that no matter what, the fashion that you pick for your characters has meaning and will have real kind of mechanics behind it or information-rich pieces of storytelling behind it. And it's more than just adding random details to make a character look cool, right? It's there to push traits that make the character unique. So fashion isn't necessarily just clothes, right? So a t-shirt is just a t-shirt. Fashion is when you put it all together and you kind of form a story around it. And fashion doesn't necessarily just mean high fashion. This is all fashion, no matter what you wear, whether it is like just leggings and a sweater, or it actually is like on a runway. All right, so now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, I want to talk about fashion and the fact that when I was pitching this talk a lot of people ask me why. Like, why does it matter if we talk about fashion in games? And I'll get into it, but kind of the reason you should care about fashion is actually the reason it sucks. So Bill Cunningham, once a fashion columnist for the New York Times, said that fashion is the armor to survive the realities of everyday life. And I think that applies both online and offline. In a real-life context, fashion matters more than you think. Even if you think they doesn't matter or you don't care, they do have significance. Right, so gosh, every time I look at this, I get like a little bit angry. But so yeah, so it has a real life context, and it makes the news all the time. And even like, you know, our favorite E3 presenter talked about how their jacket was kind of the armor during their presentation. And I do feel the same way. Yeah, so I'm sorry, every time I see the skin-friendly esports dress, what is happening? I don't get it. Okay, sorry. But yeah, but I get it. Caring about clothes can seem like an oddly superficial thing to do sometimes. After all, great games can and continue to exist without runway looks, and that's fine. But why not consider new possibilities in games? And why limit ourselves when games are one of the most exciting mediums out there? Okay, so to get to my first point, just look at this person for like 2 seconds. And what opinions have you already formed about who they are? It only takes about like 2 seconds to form an opinion on a person or character, and you can get a lot from it. Age, sex, socioeconomic status, personality, occupation, and so on. It's the first impression, and it's sometimes very flawed, but nevertheless, it's pretty unavoidable. For example, regardless if you knew this character already or not, you can probably tell she's a doctor from the white coat. But you can kind of tell she's not a normal doctor because of the dress and the shoes and the accessories. There's something a little bit mysterious, something a little bit rebellious about her. And when I asked people who didn't know anything about Persona or the character at all, what kind of feelings they got from this is all the information that they kind of got. You know, she's a doctor, she really cares about her appearance, a little bit sexy and dark, all that kind of stuff. So again, it's the first impression, and you can use this to either subvert expectations or, you know, to actually build a story with it. And when you put her next to someone else, such as the student in a student, you can probably tell that she is a little bit different. She probably follows the rules more because she's more covered up. She has the turtleneck, she's following dress code, and she has the tights. So basically, the first reason fashion matters is that it's information rich. Right? You can tell a story with it. It's codified, it's meaningful, it's symbolic, and with different contexts and moods. And so you can use it to either form, you know, like a historical context, draw back a certain era, describe a setting, make or break the fantastical lands you've made. You can also send different signals, deepening understanding of your world and helping to build it without the use of walls and walls of text, which is something I personally don't like in video games when it feels like you could create a world with more visuals instead of just text. Right, so where's your character from? What is their environment they're like from? How do they dress? Why do they dress the way they do? And again, fashion doesn't necessarily need to look good. How do you denote a villain versus a hero and someone's background? What if you use clothes as an indication of something meaningful, like a culture or a festival or a beloved childhood t-shirt? How can you tell their story? Clothes are clues to tell your players how to feel about the characters so you can maximize your time with them. When things go right, your world will be filled with meaning and context without needing to explain it all the time. But when it goes wrong, you get fashion that lacks information or context. In other words, it's meaningless. To me, a lot of fashion in games falls under this. They don't bring out anything to the game, and they don't make your character feel significant in design or feel. They're kind of the moments that make you go, like, what happened here? Like in this one. I don't know what body part is that? Is that the lower thigh gap or something? I don't know what that part is. But if you don't know, this is Rex from Xenoblade 2, and I love him very much. But if I were to ask you what he does, I don't know if you could tell me. For context, he's a diver, right? So there's the little helmet at the back, so you can kind of tell. But otherwise, if there's a different angle or anything, you can't really get anything from this character design about what the character is. There's also Resident Evil 3 with Jill Valentine. So the thing about this is that Jill is a main character, but if Resident Evil wasn't that iconic and you had no idea what it was, you could literally not tell anything about her. And then this is my Sims that I was making in The Sims 3. And I really was upset at The Sims 3 because it didn't have clothes that I actually felt like I would wear. And especially for a game that's supposed to simulate real life, it felt wrong and off. So a note to make here is that there's a fantastic Polygon video about JRPG fashion and its inspirations. So I'm not here to just hate on JRPG fashion or anything, but I think my point still stands. And again, this isn't a talk to tell you how to design your characters. I don't have to think it looks good for it to actually be a good character design, right? But I want people to be aware that when you dress your characters in something, no matter what you put them in, people will think something about it. And that can either be a positive association, a negative one, or it could be meaningless. So even if we ignore how bad fashion provides nothing to the games they're a part of, it also takes away from it. Sometimes it can even counteract the mood or feel of the game, providing a really jarring experience. There's been multiple times I've been in boss fights with ridiculous outfits, and it just felt wrong and not like the kind of game I wanted to play. So my next point is that fashion has real-world meaning, whether it's internal or external. Fashion is personal expression, and that expression has both individual and communal power. So quickly, this is a study from Quantic Foundry about the most primary gaming motivations. So for women and non-binary people, fantasy was one of the top 2 things that people looked for when they were playing their games. For men, it's fourth. And fantasy here is described as being someone or somewhere else. And I think fashion plays a huge role in this. And this makes sense, right? You want to feel connected to the character you play and the role you're in. You want to be able to express who you are or want to be in a fantasy context. And even if you're not playing yourself necessarily, you want to be able to feel a real connection. So this applies to any kind of player. So when people played Halo Reach, the customization was wonderful. You can pick any type of piece of the armor and customize it, change the color, change whatever. But when they got their first look at Halo 5, they were really upset about it because it felt like plastic and it felt like just paint-overs of the same armor set. You want to feel powerful in certain games, and that's what clothes and fashion can do for you. And for me, it had a lot of personal meaning because it affected my self-expression. If I was too afraid to wear a sexy outfit in real life, I would wear it in games to kind of see how it made me feel. Did I feel empowered or uncomfortable? Did I feel more comfortable in masculine clothing? Fashion basically lets you explore something online, and then if you choose to, you can do it offline. They give you a mission and incentive to exploring that feeling if you choose to. But of course, the personal aspect of fashion can make it go terribly awry. Well, I mean, that's fine too. Due to fashion having such personal and cultural meaning to it, it's really easy to mess up sometimes, like what I just did with the slide. Even more so because the industry doesn't talk about clothes that much, and that's not necessarily because it's from any malicious intent, but just that we don't really talk about it. So that's why I decided to talk about this. So look, fashion and sexualized fashion has always kind of been a problem in games. And I've come to have really complicated feelings about it now, and I recommend reading Maddie Meyer's fantastic piece about the inexplicable sexiness of Ivy Valentine. As she writes, these outfits don't tell us anything about characters wearing them. Sometimes they contradict the stories and personalities of the women in them. And I think that's true, and I'd love to see games move away from this. She does mention reclaiming sexiness for ourselves, though I find the problem with this is that it's hard to feel empowered when this is the default option for, your character, or if you have to create a really convoluted backstory to explain why they're wearing this. It's clear when a male character has a perfectly acceptable costume for the context they're in, while the female one is wearing the coverage equivalent of like a belt. And to be clear, sexiness isn't inherently bad, but that doesn't mean it needs to be used all the goddamn time, or that it has to be used at all. It doesn't mean a sexy outfit is the only way you can show female empowerment. And now, just straying away from sexiness a little bit, I realize I'm in Australia and this is very North American centric, but work with me here. So imagine a new world where Americans and just North Americans in general are all portrayed with the American flag, the US flag. And there's literally no form of media you can look at without them being in this outfit. So books, movies, TV. And it seems really silly and ridiculous now, but after years of depiction, it gets really, really tiring. And that's kind of the most simplest and reductive way I can talk about what I'm trying to relate to next, which is that clothes have a lot of cultural meaning to them. And issues of cultural appropriation and diversity go far beyond just fashion and games, but it doesn't mean we can't do something with it, and honestly, just have fun with it. A great example of using fashion for cultural understanding is the Geeky Bayou project by Karis Locke. She's been reimagining Southeast Asian garment design for various games and movies, and her aim isn't to directly convert a character's existing clothing into local outfits, but to express the character's personalities, beliefs, and history using textiles, motifs, and silhouettes. She mentions that issues of race and culture often emerge with clothes, as people tend to exoticize fashion when they are not connected to it. So honestly, if we hire diverse developers or hire sensitivity consultants, we can design clothes to help us learn about a character's history and birthplace. In this way, clothes reflect culture, and we can still have a lot of fun with it. So moving on from that, fashion is good business. And honestly, I understand we're here to make money sometimes, we need to survive, and it's a hard life out there. And fashion can really help you with your game, your business, and making money. For example, I've never wanted to play League of Legends. Then I started seeing pictures of a neon-clad badass all over my Twitter timeline, and it was amazing, and that's how I found the Popstars music video. Unfortunately, I've heard the artist wasn't treated great, but at the time, I legitimately spent an hour researching all of the League of Legends lore I could. And in terms of business, it's, one, really good to go viral sometimes, especially as a communications director, you always want to have good marketing material. But also you can make money from it, right? When people see their heroes online, they want to be able to express and carry that feeling with them, and that's kind of what merch can do. And for example, we can get even more physical with it, like with Red Dead having their own clothing line. There's obviously Lightning from Final Fantasy and her collaboration with Louis Vuitton. And then, of course, there's Overwatch's massive financial success with the seasonal skins that they have. I'm not going to talk about the ethics of loot boxes, though, because that's a completely different topic. Sorry. But the problem is that there are no games, or games with fashion mechanics, even though it does seem like good business. Which kind of leads me to my next point, in that I really want to play a fashion game, so someone please make one. Right? So there's a huge market gap for it. When you search on Steam, there's no real section about fashion games. And if you look online, you can see a lot of AAA games. There's honestly none for fashion games, unless you want a browser game. The PC ones are pretty old, and I can't find new ones, which is making me very sad. And a lot of the other fashion games that are available to us are locked behind microtransactions on mobile, which isn't to say they're bad necessarily, like in this case. Love Nikki, Dress Up Queen, is an amazing dress-up game on mobile. It's basically Pokemon, but with fashion. So there's story quests, there is battles with people and with AI, and you can use powers, and you collect clothes, and basically you can evolve them into better versions of themselves, which is amazing, and you can battle, and it's a whole fashion-centric game that is really popular and doing really well, and I love it. I just play Love Nikki, or don't if you don't want to spend a lot of money, that's fine too. But where fashion really falls is in terms of mechanics in AAA games. Sure, they're usually cosmetic, which is totally fine, but it doesn't mean we're nearing a point where we do anything more with it. Integrating clothes as an actual mechanic could create a whole new world of gameplay. The Hitman series has been one of the nice exceptions to this, where Agent 47 can access and sneak around using different costumes, and I had a lot of fun with it. There's also Yakuza 0's minigame featuring hostess makeovers and stats, but in essence, games have mainly been seen as a more feminine interest. And I like to challenge that, like how many people thought they wouldn't like dating sims until they played Boyfriend Dungeon, that there is a way to make a fashion game that isn't just gender specific. There's a whole community out there, right? So fashion souls exist, there's fashion hunters. It's not just one gender that's interested in dressing up their character, because character customization is basically just dress up, and then just, made to sound not so girly or feminine or any of that. So bottom line is that fashion is fun, and it's games, which is really fun. So I think they work out really well together. So a quick recap and tips. This is the 3 things that we talked about for fashion. 1, that fashion is informative and that it's a language. It's expressive, so it's personal, cultural, and emotional feeling. And it's fun, which is aesthetics and style as gameplay. And if you're kind of unsure of where to start in integrating fashion into your games, I do have a few tips. And first is to start by thinking of your clothes as a story. Even if you find yourself just picking up a t-shirt every day, that kind of says something about you. And if you don't care what you wear, that also says something about you. What does a single piece of clothing mean to your character? The second is to know where your character will appear. Knowing the setting they're in, whether it's a fantasy land or real life, or it's modern or the past, really knowing your setting and the background will influence what the fashion does for you. And third is to accessorize. Know that every piece has meaning, details and everything, but remember that adding random details to make your character look cool doesn't necessarily equate to good fashion, right? There should be meaning behind it. Be deliberate with your fashion and symbolism, and don't forget that color plays a huge role. Also, yay, Golden Deer. I really love Claude. And also, you can really research real-life subjects because that will give you inspiration. The real world is full of inspiration. Stay curious about it. Watch a runway show and see like the themes that they play around with. They're a whole treasure trove of inspiration. Pay attention and be curious about why certain clothes make the news, and wonder what you can do about the world of self-expression, personality, and culture. There are a lot of resources out there for you. Remember, fashion is literally its own entire industry. There's Pinterest, there's books, there's movies, lookbook.new, historical fashion books, reality TV shows like Project Runway. Find interest in the world that's outside of games. What games can you make from it, and what can you do with it? So as an example, this is Sunder. He's a dateable blade in Boyfriend Dungeon, and this was his original design. And we decided to redesign him into this. So looking at the kind of two designs, why did we change it? So his original character direction was attractive, long hair, a little shallow, and owns a nightclub. And we knew he worked out a lot, so we gave him gym attire. But this gave the impression that his primary character trait was that he went to the gym, and maybe that's not very fashionable. So we revised it to be more in line with how we wanted the player to feel about him, that he's brazenly flirty, confident, and interested in you. And we think the new design is more effective at communicating that. Another game that really worked on research their fashion choices was Monster Prom. And I know they're both dating sims, but they're the two ones that I could get information about, so sorry about that. I know that Monster Prom has wild humor and fantasy monster themes, which was great, but they decided that they wanted it to feel really connected to real life, despite being fantastical and all about monsters. And the way they did that was through fashion. It became their thematic anchor. And they got a lot of inspiration from the real world. And don't forget that fashion can always improve. So the thing about Monster Prom was that they realized that the three girls in the game always wore skirts or shorts or dresses. So they thought it was a bit limited, so the next time around, they put in more outfits for the characters. And finally, another way you can learn to integrate more fashion into your games is to hire more diverse developers. A more diverse team means more diverse thoughts, more diverse opinions and ideas and interests, and basically that in turn will attract a different audience depending on the games you make. Overall, to me, fashion is excitement found through exploration and self-discovery, and it finds its power in aesthetic appeal and fantasy. It is a whole new style of play worth doing well. Thanks. Yes, and we have a mic for questions, if there are any. Oh, yes, I think it's up. I don't know where the mic is. It's up there? I got it.
Awesome, thanks. Yes. I'm getting, these stairs are dumb.
Yeah. I was wondering if I could get some thoughts on games that allow you to make your own fashion, such as Animal Crossing and things like that, and as a way of players adding their own expression into the game.
Sorry, so what was the question? I heard the Animal Crossing part.
What are your thoughts on allowing players to have their own input on the fashion of the game?
I think that's really fun and great to... Oh, okay, just making sure that mic doesn't do anything. Yeah, I think honestly, like games that let you create your own fashion, like Animal Crossing is super great because you can, if you've seen like the outfits that kind of come out of that, they're really fun and they're really fantastic and you can really express whatever you want with it and you can get creative with it. And I think games that actually do character customization really well, even if you can't design your own, is like any MMO, honestly, because you want to create yourself in a fantasy world, and it's really exciting and fun. Oh.
Thanks. Hello. Yeah.
Hi.
Great talk. Yeah, really
Thank
good.
you.
I was just curious if there are any other games that are maybe deceptively good at fashion, like maybe games that aren't really associated with having really good elements of fashion that you've maybe noticed that people haven't noticed.
Trying to think off the top of my head and in front of a crowd of people, no.
Okay.
But I mean, as I said, MMOs really fun. I really like the way Diablo 3 did their fashion or their armor sets, because if you picked up a piece of gear that you didn't like, you could transmogrify it and change it to whatever look you liked, and you could change the color, and that was really nice, and it was really fun to do that. So yes, but there's probably others that I can't remember in front of people.
Hi. So I'm curious if you were to make a world or a game world where clothing isn't part of the aesthetic, how would you apply fashion to that world?
How would
As in, like, maybe every, like, I guess maybe an example is like a Pokemon, or just like things that are, or even not very character-focused game, how could you bring fashion to that experience?
So if I'm understanding the question right, it's that you don't necessarily want to make a fashion game, but that you want to integrate fashion into your world somehow?
I think it's like, what sort of concepts from fashion can be kind of extended beyond clothing in a game?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the thing about fashion is that it's all about symbols. Fashion is just honestly self-expression, and you take culture and put it into a piece of clothing. So if you're trying to put it into other things, like, I don't know, architecture, like maybe the colors of their buildings, or the fact that like Melbourne has so many murals, says a lot about kind of the culture and kind of the vibe of the city. So I hope this is like kind of answering your question, because I'm trying to sort it out. But yeah, I think what fashion kind of is a vehicle for is expression and aesthetics with it brings meaning through symbols. Does that make sense? I hope so.
All right.
Thank you for running around.
No, that's great. My thighs are doing great. Thanks. Thank you.
Hey Vic, Tran from League of Geeks. I got a question that basically pertains to fashion in games and how we systemize it. So usually fashion or clothing in games, as you were saying with World of Warcraft, has to do with armor or some sort of mechanical rating. I was just wondering if you know of any examples of games that have taken something that is generally subjective, which is how we express ourselves through fashion, and we all have subjective opinions of what is good fashion or what are the tastes that appeal to us. If there are any games that any games that have demonstrated ways of being able to actually systemize fashion in a mechanical way. I know that platforms like Lookbook, for example, rely on the power of the community, to be able to upvote things or based off popularity, and we'll find their niches within that. Mm-hmm. But do you know of any games that utilize fashion in a way that isn't just tied to damage mechanics or anything like that? Interesting things that these fashion games are doing.
Like in a voting system or something?
Yeah, anything,
Yes.
It's like, popularity because you wore this particular scarf, or you get a +8 to, sassiness because you're, wearing X or something like that.
Yeah, so Love Nikki does a little bit of that. It is, technically you could count it as damage, I suppose, but also the mobile game Covet Fashion. They integrate real life brands, and you basically dress up your character and people vote on which one they like better and which one fits the theme better, and the one with the higher vote basically wins. Yes, it's community voted. Covet Fashion, try it out. Also spent a lot of time on that.
Sorry.
Well, just out of curiosity, if someone were to go away and make more fashion games, what sort of fashion game would you like to be playing? Because you kind of covered fashion in games as a concept, but just very self-indulgent, like what sort of games would you actually like to see like more of?
So that's a loaded question because I have so many ideas, so many ideas that I want, and can someone please make them? But I guess for me, I would love to just, there's so many. I would love to play a fashion game about runway battles, I suppose. And I mean, look, I haven't like super thought of it. I'm not actually sure how you would make it, but I think it's a game system that would work if you had like two runway and you had to like a story and like runway battle and you had, no, wait, I have a new idea. Okay, so, has anyone played Battle Chef Brigade? No? Okay, so Battle Chef Brigade is a fantastic game, which I highly recommend you play, but it's a cooking RPG game where basically you fight monsters, you gather their meat, the ingredients and stuff, and then you cook doing match 3. So I'm thinking, what if we go out, we battle things, and we collect like cotton and stuff, and then you create your own clothes, and then you put it on a runway, and then people judge it. Wait, this is a great idea. Someone make this. It's a free idea. Okay, yeah. Wow, thank you. I just thought of a new game idea.
Hi.
Hi.
Whoa. I think it was mentioned earlier, and I think you mentioned it as well, clothing in games is often representative of some of the mechanics, so maybe it's armor, or it gives you a buff to attack, or some other mechanic in the game. And I know for certain that in games I have specifically debuffed myself so that I'll look the way that I want to look, or I have specifically not looked the way I wanted to look so that I could have a better set of stats. Do you feel that fashion is actually just another axis that we have to take into account when we're playing a game, or do you reckon that it would be better to try and make that more homogeneous with the other stats in the game? So like, it's easier to look the way you want to look, but also play in the way that you want to play.
I mean, it depends on the kind of game you're trying to make, obviously. I mean, I just mentioned this already, but I think, again, the way Diablo 3 did it, where you could change the clothes. If, like, let's say you got this set of armor and you got a new one, and you decide you like the old set of armor, you could change it to look like that old set of armor, but keep the stats of your current one. Or there's another, oh, I forgot the game. But there's another game where it's basically, there's an aesthetic slot for you to put your armor in, and then there's actual like armor that you have that will improve your stats. I think that's like a really interesting and cool way to do it. I think clothes should be more homogenized with like, and kept in mind with like fashion and or with the game mechanics and the stats, but you make your own game, so I'm not gonna fault you, but I think it should.
Quite fair.
Are we good? Are there more questions? I thought. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on how game makers could start researching any kind of fashion, but I was thinking particularly of functional fashion, like you put up a doctor from Persona earlier. I'm guessing the makers of Persona are not that concerned for her to look convincingly like a doctor. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking things like, for instance, in Dishonored, they have not only cops who are very distinctive, but you also have distinctive levels of cops, so you know whose poses a really immense danger to you. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about, especially given that the setting of Dishonored is a kind of Victorian era type setting, do you have any thoughts on how we could go about beginning to think about research and where we'd get our information? You have kind of said, oh, there's these things online, but do you have a systematized way of approaching this?
I don't necessarily have a systematized way of approaching it. So when I'm looking for specific like fashion things, obviously it's Google is pretty great. Searching online is pretty great. But I find that actually if you go to a library, and also shout out to libraries, which are the greatest things in the world. If you go to a library, you often find information there that you wouldn't find anywhere else online, because so many people are now just looking online at things. And here, wait, let me just go back to that slide. Again, yeah, fashion is its own industry. They have a lot of resources out there for you. The Fashionpedia is a really cool way to kind of look at everything, but there's a lot of fashion books out there. Just going to your bookstore and kind of like browsing through and knowing what you're looking for. If you're looking for Victorian fashion, you go look at like a history section maybe, or a fashion section. Yeah, I would honestly just be like, look at books. A lot of people miss out on great fashion books, which have, you know, all the illustrations and all the designs and explain every part of the clothing and how to draw it and how to like kind of design it and what looks good and silhouettes and seams and fabrics. Yeah, it's all great. And oh, hello, there's a question up there. I'm so glad everyone has questions because I ended sort of early. I talked a little too fast.
Wait, who was it? Yes? Okay.
It's an easy one. I just missed the opportunity to get a snap of your slide with the triangle with the different elements.
Okay.
Thank
so,
you.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, that's it. I just
okay,
I
that's
want
it?
to yeah.
Okay,
that.
no, that's good.
Thank you.
I was just saying this, again, this is not related to fashion at all, but people love like shapes and graphs and numbers on slides. So if you're ever going to do a talk, put a shape on it.
I didn't know what it said, but I was like, oh, that must have been important.
Exactly, right? You see a triangle, you're like, oh, that's important. That's like Illuminati or something. Are we good? Cool. Yeah, no. Okay, thank you so much.